Thomas Jefferson comes back to Monticello again, retreating to the place where his name feels safest. He is a man who understands that he can shape what people see, decide what gets written down, and purposefully leave gaps in the record. He trusts those gaps to protect him. But 200 years later, a thin strand of DNA slides into those gaps like a key. If you do not follow what comes next, you might keep believing a clean family story that says Jefferson's private life stayed spotless. The truth is more complex, and it broke late because a line of men spent 2 centuries saying, "Not him." The twist is not about gossip. It is about a son named Eston and a mother named Sally Hemings. Before Thomas Jefferson became a symbol, he was a person building a life with a public face and a private house. He belonged to a powerful white family with a name that carried weight like a modern brand. Jefferson's world ran on image, control, and silence. He grew up in a system where what people believed was often more powerful than what was true. In 1802, a man named James Callender made accusations about Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Jefferson's defenders dismissed it as a political smear, leaning on the idea that there was no direct proof. This denial became a family habit passed down like an heirloom. White descendants insisted there were no children with Hemings, pointing instead at Jefferson's nephews, the Carr brothers. They acted as if the safest answer was the only answer. After Jefferson died, his fame turned his family into caretakers of a legend. Caretakers do not like cracks, so they patched them and told the world to stop looking. Meanwhile, Sally Hemings's descendants told a different story through oral histories, stating Jefferson was the father. For generations, their story was framed as talk or rumor because they did not hold power. That is how a lie lasts 200 years. It is protected. Then, in 1998, that protection weakened. Researchers used a DNA test to look at the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed down the male line from father to son. By testing living male line descendants, they could compare patterns. The results showed that the Y chromosome from male line descendants of Eston Hemings matched male line descendants of Jefferson's paternal uncle, Field Jefferson. This match pointed straight at the Jefferson male line. The pattern was rare, with a chance of a random match under 1%. This is where the trap snaps shut. Many had clung to the idea of the Carr brothers to keep Jefferson's image tidy, but the DNA ruled them out. The Carr line did not match. The DNA did not write one name in bright ink. It did not say, Thomas Jefferson did it, like a stamp. It showed the father carried the Jefferson Y chromosome, which meant Thomas or another Jefferson male present at Monticello. Records showed Hemings conceived only during Jefferson's visits to Monticello, never during his absences. This timing tightened the circle. If the conceptions line up with his presence and the Y chromosome lines up with his family line, the old denials start to sound like a strategy. By 2000, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation described it as highly probable that Jefferson fathered Eston and likely all 6 of Hemings's recorded children. 2 centuries of denial were grabbed by the collar by a modern test. The drama involves white descendants who refuse to accept the truth because it cracked the legend. Slavery taboos and reputational fear were social explosives. If they admitted the truth, it would change how the country looked at one of its most famous names. They chose to deny, building alternate stories and treating rumors like attacks. While white family accounts pushed the story down, Hemings's descendants kept it alive through oral history. The 2 stories ran side by side like rivers that never meet. Organizations like the Thomas Jefferson Heritage Society also fought the Hemings story because it threatened the image they protected. They pointed to Jefferson's brother Randolph, who visited Monticello and had young sons nearby. This offered a new target, allowing people to assume that because there was a debate, no one really knew the truth. DNA did something no argument could do. It did not care about reputation or who felt offended. It forced a choice: accept the match or reject the method. When science points at a family story, it feels personal. Jefferson's own movements became evidence because the record of Hemings's conceptions lines up with his visits. In a world where powerful men shaped what was written, the calendar became a witness. Sally Hemings is not a footnote. She is the mother of Eston, and her descendants carried the truth when paper records were controlled by power. The side with the documents did not have the full truth. The DNA backed up the oral history in a way the public could not ignore. Jefferson lived in a society that benefited from official stories, but the truth of slavery is that it creates hidden families. It creates children whose names are not protected. For a long time, the public treated the white family's history and the Hemings' family's rumor as equal guesses. DNA flipped that weight. It used the male line, the very thing people use to protect a famous name, to expose what the name had been hiding. The Y chromosome test tracked the father-to-son path and matched Eston's descendants to the Jefferson male signature. This forces people to pick what they value more, the legend or the evidence. Jefferson's story is a grand house where visitors were kept in the front rooms for 200 years. The furniture was polished, and the family line was called clean. Then a door was opened with a key made of DNA. Jefferson cannot step out of the story because the evidence ties his male line to Eston Hemings, and the timing ties Hemings's pregnancies to his stays at Monticello. The old escape routes, like the Carr brothers, have collapsed. A famous man's name became a shield, but a quiet truth held by descendants met a modern method that could not be shamed into silence. Jefferson could shape his image for 2 centuries, but he could not control what his blood carried forward. In 1998, a living man's cheek swab lit a match under Jefferson's name. The DNA study pushed his defenders into a corner and changed what likely looked like. Before this, defenders used the nephews, Peter and Samuel Carr, as an escape hatch. That story rested on one weak account from 1858 by an Irish visitor. The 1998 study worked by testing male line descendants. Since no direct sample of Thomas Jefferson exists, researchers used proxies, descendants of his uncle, Field Jefferson. They also tested descendants of the Carr family's grandfather. Eston Hemings' DNA matched the Jefferson signature and did not match the Carr line. This removed the nephews from the list of possible fathers. The lead author of the study, Eugene Foster, later said headlines claiming the case was closed were too simple. The DNA could not tell Thomas Jefferson apart from other Jefferson men because over 20 of them lived nearby. The test could only say it was a Jefferson male and not a Carr. Jefferson's name was pinned to the wall by the loss of his escape route. The Carr nephews became fall guys chosen by historians to protect Jefferson's image. When the DNA excluded them, the burden snapped back to the Jefferson men. The nearby Jeffersons offered a new target for defenders, such as his brother Randolph or Randolph's sons. Sally Hemings' son, Eston, is the center of this DNA method. His descendants took part in testing that tied their bodies to a public fight. The match pulled the Jefferson family stamp into the story in a way paper records never could. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation's 2000 report used the DNA result to keep the Carrs out, then used conception timing to pull Thomas Jefferson in. Skeptics still argued that Randolph Jefferson fit better because the DNA cannot separate him from Thomas. The DNA result knocked down the claim that the nephews did it, but it also cannot separate Thomas from other Jefferson men. The study just made it much harder for Jefferson to walk out of the room while pointing somewhere else. Jefferson's male line carried a rare genetic stamp belonging to haplogroup K2. This ancient European type showed up in less than 1% of tested populations and was absent in over 1 to 800 random samples at the time. Its rarity means you cannot explain the match away as a coincidence. Field Jefferson is crucial because his descendants acted as a living thread back into the Jefferson male line. Sally Hemings, enslaved at Monticello, bore children only during Jefferson's presence. This timing lays down a hard boundary. Eston Hemings carried a father's marker that did not match his last name. The DNA match between his descendants and Field Jefferson's descendants means a Jefferson male fathered Eston. The Y chromosome is a silent witness because it passes unchanged from father to son. It does not shift because someone wants it to. It stays stable across generations. Jefferson's male line carried this rare signature, and his own life created a timeline that the births fit inside. This is where ancestry turns into evidence. Jefferson could shape words, but he could not shape the Y chromosome. Once it passed on, it traveled under any last name into the future. Sally Hemings' childbearing lined up with Jefferson's presence, turning the calendar into a pressure point. The DNA shows the connection, the timing points toward Thomas, and the exclusions remove alternatives. Jefferson's private legacy moved forward quietly through Eston's line until science made it visible. In 1802, the claim that Jefferson fathered children with Sally Hemings was a spark on dry wood. Jefferson was a slaveholder who also wrote words against slavery. These two facts sat in the same house and did not make peace. Symbols are supposed to be clean, and the claim cut into his status as a founding father. For his white descendants, family honor was a shield that protected their reputation and status. An open link to Hemings' children threatened their racial purity. Jefferson's grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, promoted other paternity stories to protect the legacy. This created an escape hatch for later defenders. As Jefferson's fame grew, it became harder for descendants to allow any story that made him look less heroic. They chose to protect the legend, and family Bibles omitted Hemings' children as a choice about memory. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Southern white families lived under the one-drop rule, where any black ancestry marked a person as not white. Accepting Hemings' children meant admitting the family line crossed the color line. Many chose rejection, leading to two families with a shared origin, but no shared recognition. Even after the 1998 DNA results, the Monticello Association voted against admitting Hemings' descendants, citing insufficient documentation while using looser standards for others. This showed that the problem was discomfort, not just paperwork. For a Hemings descendant, this denial was the erasure of their family. While scholars moved toward a consensus, some descendants still prioritized separation. Jefferson's silence in 1802 became part of his legacy, forcing others to fight the battle for him. Denial protected white descendants from being seen as connected to black relatives. The 1998 study in Nature went straight for the male line. The match was the kind that made rival explanations collapse. Jefferson's Y chromosome walked into the room for him, carried by descendants with no reason to protect a myth. For decades, people tried to keep two stories alive by blaming other men, like the Carr nephews. But the Thomas Jefferson Foundation's report noted that Hemings' pregnancies happened only during Jefferson's stays at Monticello. A Y chromosome match plus a pattern of timing made the shield crack. Skeptics still point to Randolph Jefferson because the test cannot rule him out, which keeps the case from being closed. However, the debate shifted from nothing happened to which Jefferson. After 1998, textbooks and public accounts shifted from dismissal to institutional acceptance of the paternity as highly probable. Thomas Jefferson grew up obsessed with order and records, believing he could shape his own legacy. He built Monticello as a system where every movement was timed. Sally Hemings entered that system as a teenager, learning that survival meant paying attention to who was present or gone. When Jefferson traveled, the house changed. DNA testing later ruled out the Carr nephews, but could not name a single man among 25 male relatives. Randolph Jefferson was an easier candidate to imagine because he socialized with enslaved people, but imagination breaks when it meets calendars. Every time a child was conceived, Jefferson was at Monticello. When he was away for long stretches, Sally did not conceive. This pattern removes chance. Jefferson recorded arrivals and departures, leaving behind the trail that trapped him. Jefferson freed some enslaved people in his will, but not Sally Hemings. Her children walked a thin line between bondage and freedom drawn by him. Sally watched the color line slice through her family. Her descendants were about 7-8 European, which could bring light skin and allow them to pass as white. In Virginia, the law of partus sequitur ventrum meant the child followed the mother's condition. Thus, her children began life enslaved regardless of their father. Children like Harriet, Beverly, and Eston were freed and chose to relocate, marry white spouses, and live as white. They gained privileges but had to maintain silence about their roots. Some even attended Jefferson reunions as white kin. Madison Hemings' line stayed in black communities, intermarrying with free people of color. In 1873, he wrote a memoir claiming Jefferson was his father, a direct statement in a country that punished such truths. One branch lived as white to survive, while another lived as black to avoid erasure. The one-drop rule forced a binary identity, sorting people like objects. Passing was a survival move inside a system that refused complexity. Jefferson signed his name to last forever, yet he left no biological sample for testing. His silence forced the world to chase his family's DNA. DNA is a boundary setter, not a judge. It drew a fence around a family and said the answer is inside. Jefferson is both inside the circle and not pinned to a single nail by science alone. His family line became evidence, and his schedule became a clue. He did not get identified by his own DNA, but by the DNA of his family and the dates that put him in the right place at the right times. That is a sharp ending that sticks because it feels real.